I think where most workplaces fall down is they're designed for consistency and linear productivity. So our brains are actually wired for interest, as I said before, urgency and novelty. Yeah. So I think where workplace systems are creating friction for neurodivergent people, especially ADHDers, we could be talking about long unstructured meetings, lack of clear priorities, constant context switching. And many ADHDers often struggle to transition from one task to a next, or because they might be in that hyper-focus mode to get that finished.
Welcome to Saul Searching, the Saul Recruitment Podcast, where we tackle all sorts of great topics in the areas of recruitment, job searching, mindset, technology, marketing, culture, and lots more. It's amazing what you'll pick up. Thanks for joining me. Welcome, everyone. Friday afternoon, another fantastic episode of Saul Searching, the Saul Recruitment Podcast. It's episode 75. Today, we're going to be talking about high performers and ADHD with Caroline Beresford. How are you, Caroline?
I'm very well, thank you, Darren. How are you?
I'm very, very well. Thank you for joining me.
It's my absolute pleasure. I've been really looking forward to this for a long time.
Me too. I know we're going to get into some great stuff. Your content is very, very inspiring, insightful, and I thought I'd give everybody a little bit of a rundown into who Caroline is. Caroline is an ADHD executive coach, consultant, speaker, and founder of the Addvocacy Project. With over 20 years in corporate environments and a Bachelor of Business majoring in human resources, she brings a strong understanding of workplace systems, leadership, and performance, with a focus on championing neurodiversity at work. Trained through ADD Coach Academy in New York, accredited by the International Coach Federation, and a member of the Australasian ADHD Professionals Association, Caroline blends evidence-based practice with lived experience. She works with professionals, leaders, and organizations to move ADHD awareness into meaningful, neuro-affirming change. Her work supports individuals navigating executive function challenges while helping workplaces create environments where people can perform sustainably. I'm glad I got through all that without too many stumbling blocks, but that was pretty good.
Oh, it sounds a little bit fancy. Thank you.
Yeah, very fancy.
Great bio.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Thanks for coming on the show. Let's kick off, and I'd love to get a little bit of a background story from you as to how you got into this field, what makes you so fascinated and passionate about it.
Okay, that's a really great place to start. I guess I came to this work both professionally and personally. As you mentioned in my bio, my intro, I do have 20 years of corporate experience in corporate environments, including marketing and human resources. So I guess I've always been close to how organizations think about performance, how they attract and retain talent, and also managing productivity. It became deeply personal to me, though, this idea of neurodiversity and how the world understands it or looks at it. It became more personal for me when a family member was diagnosed, probably talking 8 years ago now, with ADHD. And through that process, I recognised the same traits in myself, actually. Yeah, which happens a lot. I
was about to say, I've heard that many times.
Yes. So look, ADHD is really genetic. And I guess it's really quite often misunderstood because even like when I was growing up, ADHD would sometimes, a lot of the time would be referred to as, an excuse for poor behaviour.
Too much energy, running around.
Usually a boy that couldn't sit still and was bouncing off the walls and stuff. But through the process of supporting my family member through navigating his diagnosis, and then off the back of that, I wanted to sort of understand more so I could support him. That's when I started looking into how I can learn more about it. So that's how I discovered the Coach Academy. And halfway, I did not have any grand plans to change my career. But I got halfway through that first intro module, I think, and I discovered that there are 3 different subtypes of ADHD, and it shows up really differently between women and men, and it can change in different environments as well. So, I guess
that word, that broad term neurodiversity, there's so many facets and subtleties within that regime, that spectrum in a way, isn't there?
Yes, absolutely. And whilst getting a diagnosis is helpful, I'm I'm at a bit of a crossroads. I had a really interesting conversation with one of my clients, a cardiologist, a couple of days ago.
Right.
And we were talking about the fact of, whilst it's really, for me, getting a diagnosis was really a pivotal turning point in my life, because it just explained so much about why I had always found certain things challenging, and why I have had quite a varied career path. And I sort of wonder whether one day will we be looking at this from a spectrum approach rather than an absolute label, if that makes sense.
I think I like that, the way you're thinking about that, because I'm always of the mindset that I don't love labeling. I don't think we have to label everything so perfectly in a box.
Yeah.
Thinking about it in terms of a spectrum or just a profile is probably a better way to do it.
Profile, yes.
Labeling certain behaviors into one little category, and then you're stuck within those parameters.
And I think, hopefully, to the listeners out there that are listening to this, I think what we're going to talk about, Darren, will actually help, but it'll make it clearer.
Yeah, great. Mate. Now, obviously, even from your intro and your bio, you talk a lot about the link between high performers and high performance and ADHD. So I'd like to kind of ask a bit more and let's go a bit deeper into that, because does that mean most high performers have some form of neurodiversity, or or the other way around, or it's just a subgroup, or I'm just curious?
Look, if you look at the data, okay, let's start with the bit of statistics.
Yeah,
so if you look at the data, the current data, it's estimated that around between 2 to 6% of Australian adults have been diagnosed with ADHD.
Right.
So that we're talking just over 500,000 adults, and they're only the ones that are diagnosed.
That's right, exactly.
Yeah. If we dial in closer, and I've done so much research on this, and if there's any organisations out there that would like to pull some data together or something that can be published, or if there's a study that could be done, I'm really interested to get a figure around how many C-suite executives, high-performing leaders, but to date, there is no published actual statistic. Yeah. It is interesting, though, because if we look at the statistics, there have been studies done on the figures around entrepreneurs and ADHD. So those figures are published, and they have been published to say that between 30 to 35% of entrepreneurs have been formally diagnosed with ADHD. So what does that tell us about ADHD characteristics? It tells us that they are associated with fast-paced thinking, bit of risk-taking, being good in a crisis, problem-solving, creativity. Yeah. So if you sort of align all of those strengths.
Yeah, which are great. These are great characteristics.
Absolutely. Well, they're ADHD characteristics. And those characteristics, of course, not only needed to be a successful entrepreneur, but I really think that they are very aligned with the strengths and the skill set that executive or a leader would need.
Yeah. I suppose the tough part is to really become aware of that and understand your makeup, and to try and manage certain things, because you hear about entrepreneurs having shiny object syndrome, and they always want to start 20 companies instead of just working on 1 or 2.
Yeah.
They're always trying to divide themselves up to a million things because they get ideas.
Yes.
They're passionate and they're impulsive, but that's not always the best thing either. So I suppose it's about managing that as well and understanding.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I think it's quite poignant to mention here that ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. I mean, there's just so many negatives around that. I and my clients will attest to this. I talk about ADHD, and the training that I did, we were encouraged to look at ADHD and describing it to the people that we work with as a brain that is wired for interest.
Yeah. And I can imagine if someone is really interested in something, they wouldn't have an attention deficit. They would probably go right in and focus nth degree where someone else might not.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. It's not always about, I can't concentrate.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So it's interesting. That's why it's a profile. It's really, there's so many subtleties with it.
Yeah. I might borrow that from you, actually. Profile.
Feel free. Love that. So we touched on it a little bit, but I'd love to know, what are some of the more common signs of ADHD behavior with high-performing executives and high-performing teams?
Yeah. So what's fascinating is that how well these high performers and the leaders can actually hide it. They're very, very good at hiding it.
Interesting.
What we often see is a high amount of output, but inconsistency around that.
Right.
It could look like really brilliant creative thinking, but having difficulty with that follow through.
Yeah, makes sense.
And like really thriving under pressure, but relying on last minute urgency. So that comes at a cost at the end of the day.
Yeah. So really inspired thunder thinking, but then you have to follow through and organize the systems that back it up.
Yeah. There's actually research showing that many executives don't formally identify as having ADHD, but a significant number report traits like distractibility, impulsivity, and difficulty prioritizing. But all of the strengths come along with those sorts of things too. So
absolutely. That's some of the most creativity and spontaneity can only really derive from that type of personality as well. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, amazing. And I'd love to talk a bit more about organizations and how they're structured and how they might benefit or be disadvantageous to those kind of personalities. Are we getting better? Are we understanding things that are getting better or not really?
Look, with the people that have engaged me to work with them, obviously they're wanting to get better. Yep. I think where most workplaces fall down is they're designed for consistency and linear productivity. So our brains are actually wired for interest, as I said before, urgency and novelty. Yeah. So I think where workplace systems are creating friction for neurodivergent people, especially ADHDers, we could be talking about long unstructured meetings, lack of clear priorities, constant context switching. And many ADHDers often struggle to transition from one task to a next, or because they might be in that hyper-focus mode to get that finished.
And I think that's actually that's a thing that we all should learn, because I think they say that's one of the worst things to do is to constantly be switching between tasks because the emotional drag is very strong to continually move from one thing to another instead of just time blocking and just focusing on one thing at a time.
Yes. The other thing that I have seen, if I can think about some of the clients that I've worked with, leaders not being flexible in terms of like channels of communication and things like that.
That's a good point.
So, and that's actually, I'm thinking about a specific client of mine that was both ADHD and ASD. So, yeah.
What's ASD?
Autism spectrum.
Okay. Good.
Yeah.
And a lot of these can coexist, can't they?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Yeah. Quite often with ADHD, you will have coexisting anxiety.
Right. Okay.
And yes, actually a lot of the women that are getting diagnosed later in life were previously diagnosed with anxiety, and then they get an ADHD diagnosis later in life. And quite often it's a bit of a chicken and the egg type situation, because trying to sort of navigate the world with a brain that is an ADHD wired brain, trying to sort of like navigate a world that hasn't really been designed for the way our brains work is really, it causes friction and it can be challenging. So, no wonder people get anxious. And
back to your point before, with everything was very much linear. The world has kind of been designed that way in a way. We have rules and regulations, and if you do this, then you do that, or that happens. This is what you should do, and these are the rules of society that you have to follow. So it's very linear and very structured, whereas an ADHD brain is probably much more fluid and much more agile.
Yes, yeah. The perfect example of that is at the traditional school system. It's just so not conducive to ADHD, yeah.
And I want to continue down that path of the workplace, because it's so important for when people that might be diagnosed or might not be diagnosed or might have an inkling that they might have ADHD or be on the spectrum of some kind is how can they themselves, even if the organization itself doesn't put a lot of energy into making an environment that's conducive, how can they design their day or their behavior so that they can be more productive?
Okay. Yeah. This is the paradox of ADHD, actually. One would think that an ADHD brain would be constantly wanting to do something different or that the shiny object syndrome that you mentioned earlier. But an ADHD will be most productive when routine and firm structures are set in place, like systems.
Yes.
So to actually find those systems, that's what I do as a coach. I help people understand what ADHD is, quite often, especially if you get a late diagnosis, which many executives are getting. They're getting it once they've got to a certain level at work and they're just not able to mask anymore, especially women. It's really important to understand what does it mean to have ADHD, because you go to the psychiatrist and they go, oh, yes, you've met the criteria. They either, if you want to explore the medication path, and they'll write you a little script and see you in 6 months, but no one actually it's very rare to work with a clinician that will actually, because they don't have the time, but they're so stretched. So that's where a coach can come in, or a psychologist, and really talk to them about what does this mean? And then really understanding what their executive functioning profile is. Yeah. And by executive functioning, because we all have a set of 12 specific executive skills. Our executive functioning is our brain's ability to help us get through a normal day. Wow. With as less chaos as possible.
Can you give us a couple of those 12 skills? That's fascinating.
Yeah. So planning and prioritizing, metacognition.
Right.
So metacognition is the ability to step back and have a bird's eye view of how we're working, or how we're handling ourselves in a specific situation. Right. Time management, emotional regulation is a big one for ADHD. Being able to sustain attention.
Yeah.
Working memory. That's just a couple of them, but there's 12 main ones. And part of being able to find the right system is to understand which skills are being impacted by the individual's ADHD.
Gotcha. And I find that so interesting that it is a paradox that the profile that is very, very commonly looking for other stimulus is the one that likes to focus and be structured.
Exactly.
Fascinating.
That's what makes it difficult, because it's the consistency that lets most of, especially high performers, that's the tricky bit.
Yeah. Any other tips for how they might best, and even maybe going to speak to a coach or a psychologist or someone that helps them build a structure around?
Yeah. So finding an ADHD coach like myself, or there's lots of really great coaches here in Australia, actually. It's best to find someone that has been through an ICF accredited program, or if you're wanting to go down a more therapeutic, psychology, finding a psychologist. But it's really important to make sure that they have experience with ADHD. Most of the coaches, in my coach network, we all have ADHD. And I often find that when clients come from either another coach or a psychologist that hasn't had ADHD, it can be unless you've sort of lived it yourself, it's really hard to understand what it's like, if that makes sense.
And it's fascinating that we hear more and more these days. Obviously, it's been around forever, but people have just not known about it. They haven't been able to diagnose it. They haven't thought to diagnose it. And more people are becoming aware of it.
Yeah. To your question around what are some other things that people can do to support their brains. So in addition to finding a coach that you can work with to help you design some specific systems or strategies, you've also got the option of really taking accountability for lifestyle choices that you're making.
Yeah. I was about to ask, actually, what about food, exercise?
Yeah. So look, ADHD symptoms. So executive dysfunction is basically, it happens when we have a lack of dopamine, and ADHDers we're less able to regulate our dopamine levels.
Oh, wow.
Yep. So we need the dopamine for that executive functioning to be firing on all cylinders. But in an ADHD brain, we're less naturally able to regulate it.
Gotcha. So you might go through spikes.
Yep, definitely. Well, it generally sort of gradually it decreases over the course of the day. Yeah. So medication can help maintain that dopamine regulation. But those who don't really want to go down the path of getting a diagnosis, they sort of think, oh, look, I've got this far already.
Yeah.
But, I'd like to sort of to help my brain more or support my brain more. Lifestyle choices, like we know the research tells us that a minimum of 8 hours sleep a night is key to supporting our dopamine regulation. That's really, sleep's probably the biggest thing. How much protein we're eating in our diets.
Okay.
Yep. So there's published evidence to really recommend that an ADHD eat protein in every meal, because when we break down protein, that leads to a increased regulation in dopamine.
Interesting. I also heard higher protein meals can spike your serotonin. Is that true?
I'm not sure about serotonin, actually.
Okay.
That wouldn't surprise me.
Okay, interesting.
Wouldn't surprise me. Exercise, of course. We know that exercise increases serotonin. We also know that it increases dopamine regulation as well. Yeah. And the final one is, I like to call it attention training, but by attention training, I'm really referring to mindfulness and meditation. I use the term attention training because if I say meditation and mindfulness to an ADHD, they literally...
People think, oh, God, no. Forget it, no chance.
Yeah. But look, there is really strong research out there talking about how we can actually train to quieten our brain.
Even if it's like deep breathing for a few minutes. Or whatever.
Oh, it doesn't have to be. People get this idea of mindfulness and meditation being sitting cross-legged.
Yeah, top of the mountain.
Yogic pose for 20 minutes in the morning and 20 minutes at night. It doesn't have to be that. It can be going for a walk in nature and like with no AirPods in.
That's right, with nothing.
Yeah, so counting how many different bird noises you can hear or counting how many different shades of green you can see in the trees. That's a way of, practicing mindfulness.
Yeah, love it. Every now and again, I love my walks with my AirPods. I go for long walks.
Yeah.
Every now and again, I think, you know what? I don't want to listen to anything today. I just want to be at one with the street and the nature and the park and whatever and just have no distractions. And it's great.
Yeah.
Amazing. That's awesome. So a lot of great tips. And so it sounds like dopamine is the big key chemical that governs this profile. Is that right? It's all about dopamine.
Yes. Yeah. And that's why. So ADHDers will often, an exercise that I do with my clients is really doing a deep dive into helping them understand how they're choosing to spend their time is actually affecting their energy and their output. So I talk about a sort of a grid system and I break it up into yellow zone, which is doing the sort of the boring, less interesting tasks that we have to do them because we're grown-ups.
Yep.
So for a leader, it could be, I don't know, like an admin sort of thing or whatever, something that they're not interested in. Then there's a red zone, right? And so red zone is the yellow zone ones, by the way, we think that they're going to drain our body and our brain batteries. So that we put them off and we procrastinate and then they jump up into the red zone. And what happens up in the red zone, it's all really last minute. Oh my God, I need to get that report in and I haven't done it. And that's when our brain and our body batteries are drained the most. So if we could just actually be more aware of, yes, this is boring, but actually, is it really going to take me 3 hours to do that? No, it'll take me 15 minutes.
But do people with ADHD thrive in that red zone where it's like urgent? And
They do. But that's why many of us end up being at high risk of burnout.
Yes, you burn out.
Yeah. That's why I do these exercises with my clients is that list over the next couple of weeks what tasks originally would sit in yellow and how many, in fact, jumped up into the red. And then as importantly, we then look at how are they spending their downtime. And then that looks at how long are we spending in the blue zone, which is scrolling on Instagram, going down a rabbit hole on YouTube or whatever, or Facebook.
Yeah.
It's okay in moderation.
Sometimes it's fun because you don't want a break or whatever.
Yeah. But it's more like it's not charging our body and our brain batteries to the effect that, say, going in a walk in nature would. Or for me, it's doing my ocean rock pool swimming. So, and those sorts of activities, choosing to spend time in doing those activities, the activities that recharge our batteries intentionally and make us feel more human, that's the green zone, what I call the green zone.
Green zone. Love it.
Yeah.
And would you say that a lot of people with ADHD are introverts, or that's a totally different connection?
Oh, I wouldn't. Actually, there's probably a preconception that all ADHDers are extroverts.
Extroverts, yeah.
But that's actually not the case at all.
And the reason I ask is because a lot of people used to say to me, I'm very social, I can talk to anybody, and I'm very high energy, but I also burn out quickly. And a lot of people would say, no, you're actually an introvert because you thrive off, you need recharging. Like if I'm with a lot of people for a long amount of time, I need to step back and recharge. And a lot of people would consider that the definition of an introvert, whereas an extrovert will feed off the energy of other people and could go forever. I'm the opposite. I burn out quickly. So I'm just curious as to whether there's a connection between introverts and that burnout versus ADHD.
But it's certainly, personally for me, I get really overstimulated in really noisy environments. Most people would probably say that I'm an extrovert, but I'm not really.
Yeah.
That might surprise people. I thrive on social interaction, but I also thrive on my alone time. And I think that as I've become to understand my brain better, when I push myself and don't have that downtime, that's when I've ended up heading towards burnout.
Yeah, and I'm exactly the same. Interesting. Fascinating. Yeah, I love it. Now, I want to talk a bit more about what can companies and teams do to build an environment that's conducive to ADHDers and high performers so they can fit in and they can thrive.
Well, if you've even like from the start, that even the hiring process, if you're wanting to, this is what Aileen Smith in a previous episode was talking about, which was, I find she's incredible. Right, yeah. She was talking about how can we start even at the recruitment
set it up from the beginning,
but not being more flexible in terms of the recruitment process. I think Aileen suggested getting the questions sent prior to the interview, for example. So just being a little bit more flexible in terms of
how they respond to different.
Yeah, like some ADHD is an executive, if they've got an impulse control as one of their strongest executive skills, they might do well with having random questions fired at them. But for someone that doesn't have strong impulse control, and let's face it, so if you've got the hyperactive subtype of ADHD, those people will have impulsivity will be one of their weaker skills. And so they might blurt out something without being able to pause and think through it. Yeah. In terms of other things that organizations can do, I think that, having clarity around what the organization looks like from a structural point of view, for example, is it traditional, like top down, or is it flat? Is it matrix? So giving them a really clear understanding of what does this organization, how's it structured? How does it work?
Right. Because ADHDers might not be able to recognize that as best as others?
I think, no, it's around that. It goes back to that structure, and the less ambiguity that you can provide an ADHDer, the better the outcome is going to be.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. You hit the nail on the head. I think it's the less ambiguity, the more clarity and direction, the easier it is for everybody.
Yeah. What does the organizational structure look like? What are the expected lines of reporting? Having really clear and defined role descriptions. What does success look like? What expectations are there around output, and what does output look like?
Yeah, and I was actually going to ask you a bit more about that because, as you said, we're all very geared towards output in the workplace. But
I think we have to reframe what output, how it's measured, because high performers can offer, they're often measured on their output, but quite often that can only really be sustainable over a short amount of time. So it can lead to overworking and burning out and ending up operating in a bit of chaos. So we should really be looking at instead of what are they delivering, we should be actually asking the question, is what they're delivering now, is it sustainable? Yeah.
And what else are they doing to contribute to other factors that are leading to success in the team rather than just pure output results, whatever?
Yeah, exactly. What other strengths are they bringing to the team? I mean, I think this is a really important point, actually, is that my coaching work that I do, both with my one-on-one clients, but also my corporates that I deliver programs to, I think it's absolutely imperative to really explore every individual team member's unique character strengths. And because if we don't know what our strengths are, then how are we going to get the best out of them?
How do we manage different people to get the best out of them?
Yeah.
And that brings me also to psychometric testing. Where does that fit into all this?
Psychometric testing, oh gosh, it's quite different to the strengths assessments that I do.
Right.
I'm not quite sure if that's sort of looking at where your strengths are in terms of like a numeracy and literacy and all of that sort of stuff. It's a bit different. Whereas the main assessments that I do with my clients are the strengths profiler. So really teasing out what our signature strengths are, and also doing executive functioning profiles. So exploring what their top 3 executive skills are and what are their 3 weaker ones.
Gotcha. Love it. Okay. Amazing. Perfect. Training as well. Like if you took your team for a few hours and just explained all this to them, they'd be much more aware of, how other people's brains work, and it'd probably be better for everybody.
Oh, absolutely. I think that is creating that. It's a bit of a buzzword at the moment, but it's absolutely what we need, is having that psychological safety, that sense of, actually, it's okay to say that, my brain just works a bit differently. I think the problem is around there is still a misunderstanding that if you have ADHD, it means that you're less capable.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that at all. It just means that our brains work in a different way. And actually, if you can manage to understand and work out systems, it can absolutely end up being a strength.
Absolutely.
100%.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I think that's really what it's about. It's about how do you understand yourself and put the systems in place so you can thrive.
Yes.
We all do that.
Yeah, and being aware, like I might design, I might create a system in partnership with a client, and then they might come back to me 6 months later and go, it's not shiny anymore. We need to tweak it.
Okay, yeah. What about one?
Yeah. Or they, by that stage, most of them are quite self-aware that, it's not working anymore because I need to tweak it. I need to gamify it a bit more.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. So I think having that safety around it's okay to talk about a different way of brain functioning and not being judged is key to all of this. Because if someone feels validated and seen, then, you're going to be much more likely to retain that person over the long term.
A lot of this is just empathy 101.
Oh, totally.
Everybody will respond to this kind of behavior and this kind of interaction.
Yes.
Just we all get so caught up in our fast-paced day-to-day, and we just label everybody with the same brush, and we just got to get on with it. But if we took a step back and had a bit more empathy, I think it'd help everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. That's just triggered a thought I had that it's quite apt to mention it here. I'm working with a client at the moment. He's a programmer that works for a tech company, and they have brought in a hybrid system of working from home. And so 3 days in the office and 2 days at home, for example. And he's really struggling with the 3 days in the office. He likes going in there because he likes catching up with his colleagues, but it's open plan. And
it's noisy.
He can't, and they're not. Yes, I think that manager that's a good example of like where a leader could potentially benefit from having a little bit more flexibility in terms of what might work for one person is absolutely not going to be suitable for the other.
Yeah, perfect. And they might have some flexibility around, all right, let's make a special part of the office, or let's make a special room, or let's change this just so you have a little bit more concentration.
Yeah.
Or if generally our policy is 5 days in the office, all right, for certain people we'll make an exception or whatever.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be one way or the other.
Yeah. And look, I totally get it. Like organizations, they're wanting their people back in the office. COVID was just such a curveball. I think but I think the key thing is just having that flexibility and that empathy.
Yeah, it's just, so really it boils down to everybody understanding themselves and also understanding everybody else around you and being a little bit more tolerant and empathetic towards other people's needs, their behavior, their way of thinking, their way of working, and the way you manage expectations. And I think that's a good point actually for people with ADHD or anyone, is to learn how to manage other people's expectations of you.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And that talk on that empathy and compassion point, a lot of my clients, like most of them have got children, for example, and they, in a session, they might bring something that's happened at home that they're struggling with. And most of them will have neurodivergent children as well because of the genetic factor. And my thing is like, if you can, I think parenting a child with ADHD is very different to parenting a neurotypical child. And I have to remind myself, pause and parent. How can I be the best parent that I want to be? I need to parent with empathy and compassion, not the way so
not to get triggered so quickly.
Yes, yeah. And that's self-regulation for me isn't one of my signature traits. Let's just say that.
I love it. But I love this stuff. For me, like, I love thinking and talking and philosophizing and analyzing how we can understand ourselves, our behavior, how that affects other people, all the meta stuff. I love that stuff.
So do I.
So interesting because we're all complex people. There's so many forces that are at play at the same time. You can never label anyone with the same brush as anybody else. We're all so different.
Yeah.
And I think that's fascinating. I love that.
Yeah. That's why I just absolutely, our journey with ADHD within my family, my immediate family, has been fraught with ups and downs, as every single family that's sort of got lived experience would agree with me, I'm sure. But in a way, I feel like it's sort of helped me find my calling. Like, I absolutely love what I do. I love helping people. I've always been really curious. I mean, I started, my initial university degree was actually an applied science degree. And I got, so ADHD, I got 3 years in, so I was supposed to be graduating. And I changed because it just wasn't me. And so I moved across into business with an HR major and finished that. I obviously got credits and things, so I finished that within a year. But it's really taught me that every experience that we have, my career's jumped around a little bit, but I feel like I've come full circle and I'm now back doing the part of the science degree that I loved was the anatomy and physiology and specifically the brain.
Yes.
And when I worked at Pfizer, I looked after and worked with their central nervous system portfolio, which was their mental health portfolio.
Very complicated stuff.
That set me up to...
perfect grounding for this.
Yeah, for this, all of my coaching is very much evidence-based. And so all of that has just made me a coach.
And I want to just kind of finish this part of the conversation on a very positive note. And I'd love to just get more insight into what are some of the traits and strengths that teams should look out for and use and leverage from an ADHDer to make them more productive.
Yep. So what sort of strengths should they look out for? So highly creative, and creative, that doesn't necessarily just, stem, or it's not confined to artistic creativity.
Agree.
It's being a problem solving.
Creating a system, fixing a problem,
absolutely
a structure, or creating a program. Who knows? Could be anything.
Yeah. That specific client that I was talking about, the programmer earlier, he is brilliant and he's very, very creative.
Yeah.
So highly creative, like really creating creative ways of like solving problems. Again, it's important to note that like ADHD shows up really differently. So some people might be really creative. Others will have, some people like to work in really fast-paced environments where things are changing all the time and they're having to think fast on their feet.
Some might be better at short bursts of creativity and some might need longer processes of really iteration with that creativity. So it depends on the person.
Yeah. What else could we look out for?
I suppose, like when you mentioned before, the red zone sometimes can be a great strength, but to utilize it without burnout.
Yes. Yeah. So I think it all comes down to awareness, like being aware that, yes, okay, most ADHDers do thrive in that sort of that with a sense of urgency. But also then how do we counteract that? What are we doing to intentionally make sure that we're spending time in that green zone? Like, what are we intentionally doing to recharge our body batteries and our brain batteries?
Yeah, love it.
Because that's what's going to help teams, leaders and teams avoid burnout. And burnout rates are, you'd be quite surprised.
Oh, I'm not these days, just the pace of our modern day and our modern world is phenomenal.
Yeah, I think the statistics around the cost I've got the stats here in front of me about in Australia, studies have shown that up to 40% of workers report experiencing burnout. And, when we talk about burnout, people think that, you just need to go and take a couple of days off work and it'll be fine again. A lot of these workers are ending up in hospital. The problem is that people don't talk about it because there's stigma.
Yeah.
I think it needs to be talked about more.
Agree.
So we need to find
burnout is really important to prevent.
Yeah. So around Australia, if you look at those stats, 40% of workers, so it's estimated that it's costing our economy around $70 billion a year.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
So for people that appear on the outside to be highly driven and highly capable, their output's huge, we've got to stop and be asking ourselves the question as leaders and as managers, what's going on underneath? What can't we see? At what cost is this coming at?
And maybe every now and again, let's take a little break.
Yeah.
So let's pull it back a bit. Yeah. Fascinating. Love it. Certainly lots to explore. We've just touched the tip of the iceberg. I can imagine.
Oh, absolutely. I could talk about this all day. I'm very passionate about we have ADHD Awareness Week every week in October, but it's really now got to the point. And look, some organisations are doing it. Like I sat on a panel for the Commonwealth Directors of Public Prosecution last year, actually, and they're doing amazing stuff with their neurodivergent staff.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. That's good. Good to hear.
I work with a lot of lawyers, actually, that have got ADHD, and that doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, because of the way of thinking, but also their creativity.
Yeah, definitely. Yes.
I want to talk a bit about how people can find you, how you work. Maybe tell us a bit more about how you actually work, what your structure is, how people can find you, and I'd love to leave with that.
Yeah, so all of my one-on-one or my group coaching services are online.
Right.
I did offer in-person services. However, I was just finding that most people, the more I focused on working with adults and high performers, they much prefer working online. So I've gone to purely online now.
Yeah. And again, as well, it'd be a lot of wasted time in traveling and, logistics.
Yeah, absolutely. So I offer one-on-one coaching sessions online, and I run a group program for women as well, once a quarter, but the next one is starting on the 22nd of May. Those groups are just gorgeous. I love them because it's getting a group of women together, usually juggling really demanding jobs and families at the same time. And our last cohort just finished 2 weeks ago, and I miss them, actually. I miss my Friday afternoon sessions. But so we've got the next group coaching program, which is called Unstuck. Reclaim Your Rhythm. The next one starts on the 22nd of May. You can find me via my website, theadvocacyproject.com. That's with a double D. Or you can just use the book a call. I offer a free clarity call, half an hour session, because it's really important to ensure that is this what you need to get unstuck, create that momentum? Or am I the right fit? Mm-hmm. Is there someone, can I refer you on to another coach that I feel might be a better fit for you? So, yeah.
Well, Caroline, thank you so much for joining.
Yeah.
That was fascinating. I learned a lot, and I hope my listeners and viewers have also learned a lot.
Yeah.
And I would definitely recommend people to think about your team and the people around you, your family, with a bit more empathy, trying to understand them a little more, try to understand what can help them thrive. And if anybody's interested in reaching out to Caroline to learn more and to maybe get some coaching or to understand how to best work with the team, please do that. She'd be great.
Yeah. I'm quite active on LinkedIn as well. So I have a newsletter that I've got quite a few subscribers that I send that out each Wednesday. And you can also subscribe to my Friday edit, which is a very sort of conversational email that's sent out based on a common thread of themes or conversations that I've had with my clients from the week that was.
Love it. Now, I always leave my guests with the last word. So what would you like to leave us with today?
I would like to challenge listeners to actually start thinking about, do I need to reframe my understanding or opinion of what it means to have ADHD? And if so, how can I do that?
Okay.
Because that's where the real change is going to happen.
Love it. Amazing. And Caroline, thank you so much for joining me. Anybody has any questions, please write in to Caroline or myself, and we'll definitely handle those, and we can even possibly do another episode.
I would love to.
Yeah, so that'd be fun. So everyone, enjoy yourself. We'll see you next episode of Saul Searching, the Saul Recruitment Podcast. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Thanks again for joining me for another episode of Saul Searching, the Saul Recruitment Podcast. If you'd like to join me as a guest on the show, I would be delighted to collaborate. Feel free to buzz me on 0414 659 800 or email me on darren@saulrecruitment.com.au. I'm always on the lookout for great guests who can share their stories and expertise with my community. But for now, though, have a fantastic day, and I'll see you next time.